All right. Everybody's quiet and ready to go, it looks like. Thank you. We're delighted that all of you are with us today for our study, a very important topic. We're talking about love and marriage as the general theme. And today, specifically, we'll be talking about building blocks and cement of marriage. If you find that your home was not built upon these building blocks and had not been brought together with good cement to hold them together, perhaps you'll want to go back and rebuild it, start all over. But we're delighted that you're with us today. As a beginning point, let's read Genesis 29, verses 18 through 20. 29, verses 18 through 20. You will remember that Jacob and Esau had a falling out. Jacob was afraid that Esau was going to kill him because he thought he had stolen his birthright. And Jacob went back over to the old country from which his mother had come, and he went to the home of his uncle Laban. And in this process, he met Rachel and Leah. And we read in verse 29 or 18 beginning, and Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee yet 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. Well, this passage teaches us that love and marriage go together. Some years ago, there was a popular song that contained those words. Love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. But then some cynic who did not believe in following the Bible observed regarding those two illustrations that the horse and buggy and love and marriage are alike. Both of them have become obsolete. That's the attitude that many people have regarding marriage. They think it was all right for that first century for people, and it might have been all right for those back in the Civil War days. But the horse and buggy are from a bygone era like that, and love and marriage are from a bygone era, and they have no bearing upon us today. Of course, we do not believe this, but we must admit that marriage is in trouble today. We're living in a period of time in which people do not respect God's laws about marriage, and many people are not even getting married. I read recently in 2 or 3 places that many younger women today are turning against getting married. They don't even want to get married. I don't know, but I suspect that part of that is the fact that they're just living together with somebody else anyway, even without marriage, and they don't want to get tied down and have all the restrictions upon them because of the fact that the law has certain laws regarding it, and so they want to just live together. Well, whatever the reasons, many are not getting married, and many are getting married, but they're not staying married. We mentioned last week that people have the ideal of getting married and living happily ever after, but the truth is many get married and live scrappily ever after. They fuss and fight, and love is not found in the marriage, and after a while they divorce. Now, we've pointed out the fact at different times that the divorce rate has been very high and had been climbing until recently. I'm not persuaded that the real figures have been given recently. We used to hear 1 divorce for every 4 marriages, and then after a number of years, 1 divorce for every 3 marriages, and then 1 for every 2 marriages. But then I didn't hear any statistics that said there's 1 divorce for every marriage. About the next thing I heard was there were more people living together without being married than there are who are married. And so they don't have to get a divorce. And that's one reason why the divorce figure may sound better today, but it's not any better, because people are just not getting married and just living together, and then they just break up, and it's not counted as a divorce. Now, some are using these statistics to say that marriage has completely failed mankind, and the laws regarding marriage should be repealed. People should not have to get married today, should not have to get a certificate that gives them the right to be married. And then if they divorce, they ought not to have these restrictions placed upon them. They have to take care of a wife and kids and all of that. Many people do not believe they ought to have any laws regarding marriage at all. But I should like to suggest that marriage has not failed mankind. Mankind has failed marriage. The failures in this area are not because of God's laws regarding marriage, but because of the failures of man. Many of the problems that we have in our nation and in the world today are a direct result of man's rejection of God's laws regarding marriage. You think of the problem of abortion. That's a big thing today. And of course, we really ought to point it out. It is a big thing. We have read and heard that some 60 million abortions have been performed since it was okayed by the Supreme Court in 1973. 60 million little innocent unborn babies have been aborted, put to death. And why is that? Why are people so in favor of an abortion? I believe that a part of it is the fact that people don't want the problem of having a baby. And many people outside of marriage are engaging in that act, and they conceive a child out of wedlock, but they don't want a baby, and so they'd rather just go ahead and get rid of it. And that attitude has gotten into marriages as well. There are people who are married who don't want another baby, and the easiest thing for them is to have an abortion and get rid of it. Whatever the reasons, abortion is a great problem today, and in part it is because people have rejected God's laws regarding marriage. And then what about same-sex marriages? There are men who are marrying men, women marrying women, women marrying women, men marrying men today. And that's because of a rejection of God's laws. God didn't make them Adam and Steve. He made them Adam and Eve, man and woman, and taught them to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. God intended for that process to be within the marriage. But this business of same-sex marriages is because of a rejection of what God has to say in many places. It's contrary to the will of God. That's the moral state that we're living with in our day. When I was preaching from the church at Dalrata years ago, we had a food program, as most congregations do. We had food there at the building, and when somebody came by needing help, we had a deacon who would get food together for them. And one day, the deacon was not there, and a young lady came by the office asking for help, and she asked the secretary if she could talk with the pastor. Of course, I'm not a pastor, and the secretary knew that, but she knew that's what people in the religious world call the preacher. She knew this lady wanted to talk to me, so she brought her in to talk with me. And let me tell you about 4 things about her. Number one, she was 17 years old. She had 3 children, had never been married, and each child was by a different man. And that's the moral state that we face in America today. All because people have rejected God's formula for marriage. Well, why do marriage fail? And why are people not wanting to get into marriage today? Well, people are not following the blueprint for marriage. In Matthew 19, verse 3 beginning, you remember that a man came to Jesus and asked, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And you remember the context there, and Jesus told her, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wife. But in the beginning it was not so. And he said, what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And then in verse 9 he said, and whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her, which is put away, doth commit adultery. And so people have rejected that entirely. They marry, divorce, and remarry many times. Well, when we examine the reasons as to the kind of marriages that people have made today, we get an idea as to the building blocks that should have been put into the building of that home. And when we look at the reasons why they have trouble and divorce, we get an idea as to the cement that needs to be used to bind those building blocks together. Now, the word home is used in 2 different ways. It can refer to the family, or it can refer to the house in which that family dwells. It's used in both ways, like the word bark. Bark can refer to the sound of a dog, or it can refer to the outer area of a tree. The word home sometimes is used in reference to the house itself. And I'd like for us to think about the building of a house. Now, we'll just call it a home like the insurance people do. The building of a house, what's going into it? You have blocks and you have cement to bind those blocks together. The same thing is true in regard to building a home. There are some building blocks that are necessary to build a good home, and you have to have some cement to make those blocks stay together. Now, we're always finding new things that'll make a house last longer. We need to come up with some things that will make the home last longer. And that's the purpose of a class like this. We're trying to strengthen the home, trying to suggest some things that'll hold a marriage together. We want to think about some building blocks that should be used in the building of a home, and then the cement that's necessary to hold those blocks together. You wouldn't just pile those blocks on top of each other and expect the house to stay together. If they're not bound together, they'll fall apart with a good wind. So we like to talk about the building blocks and the cement necessary to bind them together. First of all, let's think about the building blocks of moral values. Now, the Bible teaches us to live morally. He has moral laws, and they bind us together within marriage. When two people enter into a marriage with widely differing moral standards, value systems, then weakness and tragic will come. Wreckage will come if people do not build their homes upon the moral values of the Bible. I was preaching for a congregation that had a number of people, and we had a building that was seated 1,100, and we had just about every kind of marriage you can think of within that congregation. There was a young lady who was a Christian, and she was married to a young man who was not a Christian. She lived by one moral standard, and he wanted to live by another one, the standards of a barnyard animal. I don't understand how she married him in the first place. It looks like she should have known his moral values before they ever married, but apparently she didn't or didn't care. She married him, and that young man liked to go to the nightclubs to drink and dance, and she was a Christian, and she couldn't do that. One morning she came in to see me in the office. I had not been there very long till she came in. She appeared to have had no sleep the night before. She really looked bad, and I think she had not slept. Her husband had been out to one of these nightclubs drinking and dancing. He came home with lipstick on his collar and drunk. She knew he didn't normally wear lipstick, so she had a problem, and she didn't sleep the rest of the night and came in to talk with me about it. Now, that's the situation of many homes today. One of the members of the family lives by the moral laws of God, and the other one lives by the moral laws of the world. And homes are not going to last if they have two different moral standards in that home. Both need to unite upon the moral standards that are taught in the Bible. Without morality, a home cannot stand, and without morality, a nation cannot stand. Solomon said in Proverbs 14 and verse 34, "Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people." Sin will destroy a nation, and it will destroy a home as well. Dr. Elton Trueblood wrote, "Sexual corruption is one of the chief symptoms of a sick and decaying society." Now, if that's true, and I'm sure it is, how long can America continue to stand? Because we have a moral problem in America today. Go with me into history a little bit. In 1986, a Gallup poll showed that 68% of college students had committed fornication. Folks, that's nearly 7 out of 10. That's the moral condition back then. It has been getting worse. In 1991, 85% of boys and 75% of girls had committed fornication by the time they were 18 years old. And it has gotten worse and worse since then. 40% of babies, we were told, were conceived out of wedlock. 40% were conceived out of wedlock. Dr. James Dobson has been the leading psychiatrist and counselor for married people, I think, in the last 25 or 30 years. He said, "Every society which extended sexual permissiveness to its people was soon to perish. There have been no exceptions." Now, you think about America. How long can we continue to stand because we have given immorality as the standard to the people of our world today? Dr. Trueblood said again, "Of the 22 civilizations that have been upon earth, 19 of them fell when they reached the moral state that America's in right now." How long can America continue to stand? If 19 of the 22 civilizations that have been in existence fell when they reached the moral state that America's in right now. When the the man and woman build their homes upon the moral values of God's Word, that marriage can last. But if they have two different moral standards, or no moral standards at all, according to the Bible, that marriage cannot stand. So one of the building blocks that needs to go into the building of a home is a good moral standard, God's standard of morality. And then number two, the building blocks of religious values are also vitally important. In fact, this probably is the most important ones. People need to unite upon the teaching of the Bible. A person ought to be a Christian and ought to marry a Christian. That's the finest thing you can do if you're going to get married. Out of 25% of the divorces that a certain book mentioned, 4 out of every 5 divorces had absolutely no church connections. Professors Landis and Landis, which was a husband and wife team, studied over 4,000 marriages, and 25% of them had ended in divorce. That was some time ago. And out of that 25% that divorced, 4 out of every 5 had no religious connection. Do you see what could have saved that marriage? If they had built their homes upon God's Word, if both of them had been Christians serving God together, those marriages likely would have been all right. Religious convictions give strength to marriage. When you're doing what God says in regard to marriage, you know it's going to help. God started the marriage process. He gave the laws that'll make it work. And as long as people submit to those laws of God, those marriages are going to hold together and they will be successful. In that Matthew 19:9 passage, Jesus said, "And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery." That's God's law. People cannot just divorce because they don't get along or because she burned the bread, all these trivial reasons. They must stay together until death. The only thing that can allow her to put away her husband or him to put away his wife is fornication on the part of one's partner. That's the only thing. 1 Peter 3:7, you remember that the Apostle Peter said, "Likewise ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, that your prayers be not hindered." Your prayers can be hindered. Your service to God can be hindered if you don't follow the will of God in marriage. When we build our marriages upon God and His will, we have the strongest foundation upon which to build a home, and we have the basis upon which every problem can be solved. I've done a good deal of marriage counseling in my day as a preacher, but I have never seen a problem that could not be solved if the husband and the wife would be Christians and follow the will of God. Every problem can be solved if people will submit to the will of God. Husbands and wives must submit to the will of God if the marriage is going to work. Go back into history with me again just a moment. An ad in the Dallas Morning News some years ago said, marriage insurance. It's saying if you want a good marriage, take out this insurance. He'll tell you what it is. Marriage insurance, and went on to say, at the national average, 1 out of every 2.5 marriages end in divorce. But where both husband and wife are Christians, study the Bible together, worship together, there was only 1 divorce out of every 1,015 marriages. Think about that. The national average then was 1 divorce for every 2.5 marriages. But for those who are Christians, serving God faithfully together, there was only 1 divorce for every 1,015 marriages. That says people ought to be Christians, living for God together, and they'll be able to solve their marriage problems and have a great marriage. Marry someone who will help you go to heaven. Don't marry someone if that one will not help you to go to heaven. Now, I'm aware of the fact that there are those who are Christians today because they married a Christian. In this audience, I'm sure there are some who are Christians because you married a Christian and that one led you to Christ. That's wonderful. We commend you for that. We commend the Christian who led you to Christ. But all you know are those here in the building worshiping God. You don't know about those outside this building who were Christians, who married out of Christ, and then were driven or led away from Christ by someone who is not a Christian. I can tell you from my observation of preaching all these years and working with people that many more people outside these buildings were led away from Christ than there are in the building who were led to Christ by faithful Christians. We commend those who are faithful Christians. We're delighted that you were able to leave your mate to Christ, but it is a dangerous process. The two must be agreed religiously to build a strong family. Now, we're not talking about compromise of convictions. We're talking about unity of convictions. Agree to go to the Bible and do what the Bible says. Follow the Bible. That will provide unity of convictions. So if we want to have a good marriage, we need to build them upon religious values. Both husband and wife need to be Christians. Number 3, we need to build our homes upon the physical building blocks. Now, we've been afraid to talk about this for many years. We haven't really talked about it as much as we ought to, even in a context like this. We've just been afraid to talk about it. But I heard about a father who thought he better talk to a little boy. He had a boy 9 years old, and he and his wife were expecting another baby. And they thought, they better talk to that little boy. The little baby shows up on the scene. He'll wonder what in the world brought that baby on the scene. And so the father talked to his son and said, "Son, we need to talk about the birds and the bees." And he told her about that stork business, you know. He said, "A stork may fly around and around this town, and one day he may land at our home." And that 9-year-old said, "I sure hope not. I might scare Mama. She's pregnant, you know." That's about the situation today. Young people today can teach the parents a thing or two about some of these things. They're bombarded with it from every direction. If they go to the movies, they'll see a great deal of that. They'll see a lot of it on television, computer, cell phone. Young people today know much more than parents think they know. Some are afraid for their high school kids to be in a class like this where we talk about these things, and yet those young people probably know more about it than mom and daddy do. Now, the physical relationship of marriage is of tremendous importance, but the role of sexual relationships in marriage has been grossly exaggerated and tragically misplaced in marriage. And some people make that aspect the most important thing in marriage. Some people believe that's the most important block that you'll put into this marriage, but it is not. Think with me. A very small amount of time is concerned with that aspect of marriage. And if that is the main thing in marriage, not much time is devoted to that aspect, and that marriage is not going to make it. The physical relationship in marriage is important. It is of God. There's nothing ugly about it at all in marriage. God started it. God placed it in marriage and said, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." But it is not the only thing in marriage. After a while, that aspect of marriage may not be as important as it was in the beginning. Changes will come. We may lose beauty and good looks in marriage, and it may not be as important to people later on. Age may change things. Illness can change things, you see. And what are you going to do about that marriage? If your marriage was built upon that aspect, and then after a while it's not as important as it was early in marriage, it won't hold a marriage together. I remember counseling with a young couple, and one of the main problems was she was having her husband to sleep on the couch instead of sleeping in the bedroom with her in her bed. Now, your first impression will be, well, she probably did not want to engage in that aspect of marriage. And so they were having problems in that area, and she made him sleep on the couch. But that was not it at all. That young man would come home drunk, vomiting all over the place, and she did not want him in the bed with her. That was the problem. Sometimes there are problems in the bedroom because of these problems outside the bedroom. The other building blocks sometimes are not built into that marriage, and so there are problems in that area. But it's because we have not built in the other building blocks, morality, religious building blocks, doing what God teaches us to do. Well, when the other building blocks are properly built into that marriage, they will support each other. All those blocks together will hold the other blocks up. And the physical relationship becomes more beautiful and satisfying if we have all these other building blocks built into it. But if there is a compatibility in the physical relationship and these other building blocks are not built into it, that marriage will soon fail. We have to be building our homes upon all that God has taught. And one of the things He has taught is that husbands and wives are to express their love to each other in that physical relationship. And if it is not built into that marriage will not stay together. When I was preaching for the Dalraida Church in Montgomery, we had a lot of folks in the congregation. We had about 600 people on a Sunday then. And there was a young couple that was having trouble, but I didn't know it. Didn't know if anybody else knew it. But the husband came in to see me one day, and he told me his wife was going to divorce him. And he wanted me to help try to save his marriage. Well, they had not approached me before and had not talked with me about it. I didn't know they were having trouble. She didn't come with him. He came to ask me to help them save their marriage. I asked the wife to come in and talk with me, and she did. But she did not come in to ask me to help them save their marriage. Nothing was going to save that marriage so far as she was concerned. She'd already paid down $400 deposit on an apartment. She was going to move out. She was going to divorce him. And I tried to find out what are the problems. Maybe we can help bring this thing back together. And so we talked about several things. And finally, the physical relationship came up. She said the sexual aspect of marriage is good in our marriage. In fact, that is the only thing that was good in the marriage. Now think about it. She is saying the only thing that was good in their marriage was the physical relationship, but she's going to divorce him anyway. You see, the physical relationship is important, but that alone is not enough to make a great marriage. That part was all right in that marriage, but they divorced. We need to build our homes upon all of these building blocks that God teaches us to build into it. And one of them is a physical relationship. And, of course, in 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 5, Paul teaches that the husband and wife have a responsibility in that area. They're not to keep themselves from the other. If we have time, I want to read that passage from a modern speech translation. And if we have time, I'll read that, and that'll help with that. Modern speech translations sometimes put it down into cornbread language so we can understand what's being said in the thing. But remember, to build a good marriage, we need to build it upon the physical building blocks. But that is not the only building block. It is not necessarily the most important, but it is important. And then there are the mental building blocks. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, verse 11, Solomon said, "For wisdom is better than rubies." Now, rubies are important. They're valuable. But wisdom is better than rubies. And that's true in marriage as well. I do not know of a specific passage that says that a person must marry someone who is compatible with them completely intellectually. I don't think there's a passage that says that. But common sense tells us that some degree of compatibility ought to be found in that marriage in regard to mental ability. If one is way up here intellectually and then marries one down here who is mentally deficient, that marriage is not going to make it. They have to have some compatibility there. A number of years ago, when I was going to perform a wedding ceremony for a young couple, I had a premarital questionnaire that I used. I'd ask the husband and wife to fill out that questionnaire. And I asked questions that would help me to see areas in which we need to do a little work in teaching. The young man indicated on his questionnaire that he thought his bride was not on a par with him intellectually, and he wished she were more intellectual. Well, that means he thought he was smarter than her. Well, that doesn't always work to think like that. Did I tell you about this man who was having a little difficulty with his wife? And he said to her, "I don't understand why God made you so beautiful and yet so dumb." She said, "He made me beautiful so you would love me, and He made me dumb so I would love you." There may be marriages like that. A man may be mistaken. Now, perhaps there are some intellectual people who would like to have the opposite for a mate, somebody who's not as intellectual as they. But I don't know of any like that. That would be a very rare thing. People want to have somebody who is near them intellectually. I know a young man who is not all at home. He's a good fellow, but he's mentally deficient. But he has a pretty good marriage because he married a girl about like him, on about the same level. People need to be as close together intellectually as they can be if they're going to have a good marriage. I think we need to think more carefully about some of these things that we haven't really thought about. People just jump in and because they think they love somebody, they get married without even thinking about all these other building blocks that need to be built into that marriage. Read Proverbs 31. The worthy woman of Proverbs 31 is an intelligent, successful woman who is a capable manager of a large household of children and servants. And in Proverbs 31, verse 26, the Bible says, she openeth her mouth with wisdom. That worthy woman, the ideal woman, is a wise woman. But she is apparently compatible with some people who are judges, lawyers, philosophers. In verse 23 it says, her husband is known in the gates. Now that expression, in the gates, normally meant that there was someone who was a judge or someone who can give advice, maybe a philosopher, somebody who helped people with their questions. Her husband did that. She was said to be a wise woman, and if he was one of those who helped answer questions at the gate, then they must have been very similar in their abilities. So it would be good if husbands and wives would give consideration to that aspect as well and be as compatible as possible in regard to their abilities. And then number 5, now we're rushing over these because our time is very limited, but I'm just suggesting these things. And as we go along through this quarter, we'll be touching on some of these things a little more deeply. Number 5, we must build our homes upon the financial building blocks. Now, money is essential to marriage because you can't live on love. Now, you have to teach your young people that because when they think they're in love, they become as blind as a bat, and they can't see they have to have money to live on. And sometimes they say, well, 2 can live together as cheaply as 1. Well, if one of them is dead, that may be true. If he doesn't have food, doesn't have to have clothes to wear and insurance and a car and all that, maybe 2 can live together as cheaply as 1, but 2 cannot live together really and live as cheaply as 1. One of the leading causes of trouble in marriages is financial problems. In my experience in marriage counseling, I have found that that's one of the leading causes of trouble in the home. I was preaching for a congregation some years ago. A lot of people in the congregation, and I didn't know each individual family and how they were doing. But one day, one of the ladies in the congregation came in to talk with me, and she sat there for over an hour and a half, crying and pouring out her heart because of her home relationship. The husband was neglecting his wife, neglecting the children, didn't spend any time with them. And she was saying, he's just grasping for money all the time. He'd come in late at night after the children were in bed. He left in the morning before the children got up, didn't spend time with them, didn't spend time with her. He was a house builder. And she said, when we sell the houses that we have built right now, we'll have $600,000 to $700,000. Now, folks, that's 35 years ago or so, a long time ago. That'd be maybe like $2 or $3 million now. It was not that he had to have money, but when he was at home, if he was there when his children were still up, he was in his room working on plans to make more money, neglecting his family. A lack of money can cause problems, and a lot of money can cause problems. One's attitude toward money can cause problems in a home. One man went to see a marriage counselor and talk with him about the fact that they were having problems with money. And he told the counselor, every day my wife asked me for $50. That was a long time ago. Asked me every day for $50. He said, what is she doing with this money? He said, I don't know. I haven't given her any yet. Maybe that's the reason she's asking for it every day. Some men do not have the understanding that they ought to have regarding the home. The Bible teaches that they're to support their family, 1 Timothy 5:8. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. I told you about that young couple Maybe some didn't hear it, but I want to mention it again because it is so pertinent. This young couple was having trouble. He was working out of town. He had to go all week away from home, and when he left on Sunday afternoon to go, he wouldn't leave any money for his wife to buy food for the children. Had a little baby, didn't even leave money with her to buy milk for that little baby. She went in desperation. She got a job at a bank, and with the opportunity to handle money, she embezzled some money. Not very much, but she was so desperate for money, she embezzled some and was caught. We finally got that young man to repay the money she had taken from the bank. It was only $150. And she was a fine young lady, but she was desperate, and we tried to save the marriage as well as keep her out of jail at that time. And because the husband went ahead and paid the money that she had taken, she went back to the bank. She was a Christian, and she tried to make things right with them. And that young man was the cause of all that because he did not take care of his family. Well, to build a strong marriage, it includes the financial part. We need to think about that when we get married. We can't just rush into marriage if we don't have any way to get money and live. Now, we've mentioned 5 building blocks that ought to go into the building of a home. And remember, the home here refers to the people in that house. But you wouldn't just put those blocks on top of each other and expect them to stay together. You have to cement them together. And I'd like to mention 3 ingredients of the marriage cement that will hold these blocks together. Commitment is the first ingredient. There must be a commitment to marriage itself. We determine that we're going to stay married regardless of problems that may come. Now, difficulties will come. That's why marriage vows speak of for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, in adversity and in prosperity. There will be some bad things and good things, but we have to determine we're going to stay in that marriage regardless of which one comes. Vance Packard tells of a co-ed at a college in a Midwestern state who had won a scholarship to go to college. In the meantime, she decided to get married. She went to the school authorities and said, now, I've won this scholarship to come to college, but I've decided to get married. If my marriage doesn't work out, can I still get that scholarship if I come on to school? How long do you think that marriage is going to last? Not very long, because she was not committed to the marriage. If it didn't work out, she was going to come back and get that scholarship she hoped. Without commitment, it's like putting these blocks together with wax. Suppose you put the bricks or blocks together in a house with wax. When the sun comes up and the wax melts, that thing will fall. Trying to put a marriage together without commitment is like putting blocks together with wax. There must be a commitment to the marriage itself, and second, there must be a commitment to the person we marry. Many years ago, when Mackie and I married, and Brother Orville Boyd asked me, do you take Mackie to be your lawful wedded wife to live together after ordinance of God and so on, until death do you part? And I said, I do. That meant I was saying I don't to everybody else. In our marriage, we're saying I do to this person, but we're saying I don't to everyone else. There must be a commitment to the marriage itself and to the person we marry. Until death do us part is the phrase that's used in the past in marriages, but maybe it's changing to something like this: until death do us part, or until something better comes along. That's the attitude that many people must have about it. I'll commit myself to you as long as I dig you, but if I don't dig you anymore, I'm going to go to somebody else. There must be a commitment. That's the most important part of this marriage cement. That will bind those blocks together. Number 2, caring is the second ingredient. By caring, we mean unselfish love for one's partner. When Paul described love in 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, he said, seeketh not her own. Love doesn't seek its own good. Love seeks what's best for our marriage partner. Think of the marriage partner. I heard a story years ago that impresses upon me. I think it's a good illustration of it. There was a couple, 70 years old, and they've been married 50 years. They went to bed one night, and the man was almost asleep, and he heard his wife weeping. He jumped up and said, what's wrong, hon? She said, well, the time was when you would kiss me good night before going to sleep. So he said, is that all it is? He kissed her good night, tried to go to sleep. He heard her again, weeping. He said, "What's wrong, hon?" She said, "Time was when you would hold my hand before going to sleep." So he took her hand and held it, tried to go to sleep. He was in that never, never land again, and he heard her crying. He said, "What's wrong, hon?" She said, "The time was when you would nibble on my ear before going to sleep." He started throwing off the cover, getting out of bed. She said, "Don't get mad." He said, "I'm not mad. I'm just going to get my teeth." That's loving your mate, you see. Pleasing your mate. We have to have that kind of care and love in our families if our marriages are going to stay together. Now, we sometimes say marriages are made in heaven. That may be, but they come in kit form. You have to put them together here on earth. The maintenance work is here on earth. If loving our neighbor is the second most commandment, and Jesus said it is in Mark 12:31, how much important is love for our mate? Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives, as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Titus 2 and verse 4, older women are to teach the younger women to love their husbands. So caring, loving one's mate is the second ingredient in this marriage cement that will hold these building blocks together. Communication is the third C, the third ingredient in this marriage cement. Good communication is important in any working relationship or in sports. What's the name of that school over in Tuscaloosa? Plays football sometimes. Yeah, that's it. Suppose they get a quarterback for this next year, and he speaks Russian. That's all he speaks. Nobody else speaks Russian. How successful do you think that team would be if he speaks Russian? Nobody else can speak it and understand it. It wouldn't work. That's true in the business. It's true in the home. Husbands and wives need to be able to communicate. Now, that's so important. I'm going to spend the whole period next time talking about communication. Come back and be with us then. Dr. David Macy studied the books that had been written about problems in marriage before 1970. He found the word communication seldom was used in dealing with problems before 1970. From 1970 down to this day, virtually every book dealing with problems in marriage talks about communication. Lack of communication is one of the problems in marriage. It's a must in marriage. You have to have it if you're going to live together. You remember that story I told you about the man and his wife sitting in their living room? He's reading the paper. She's looking out the window. She sees the man next door come home, and he gets out of his car, and his wife comes out, and he kisses her. And this lady has seen that many times. She said to her husband sitting there, "That man next door kisses his wife every time he sees her. Why don't you do that?" He said, "I don't know her well enough yet." You see, we have to be able to communicate and understand each other, or problems can come up. Actually, we don't choose to communicate or not communicate. We're going to communicate with their silence. You can say if they're silent, and that's communication when you have a problem. You can communicate with words, with your attitudes, with your actions. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about those things next week as we talk about communication. But communication is vital in a marriage. In spite of all of these enemies of marriage and all the attacks that are made upon marriage in our day and every effort of the devil to destroy marriage, I'm confident that marriage will continue until time shall be no more. I believe there are Christians who love the Lord and love His will, and they want to do what's right, and they want to make their marriages work. And I believe marriage is going to last. A horse and buggy may be from times past, and we may not need horse and buggies today, but marriage and love go together, and they will be here as long as man exists upon earth. Christian marriage is more than a man just living together with a woman, but a man and woman live together according to the will of God, building all these building blocks into this marriage. There are some others that we haven't talked about, but these, I believe, are the most vital ones. Christian marriage has strong building blocks: moral, religious, physical, mental, and financial building blocks. And they are glued together, welded together with marriage cement. There are three ingredients, as we mentioned, in that marriage cement: commitment, communication, and caring. If we'll use those ingredients in that marriage cement, these building blocks will hold together. I appreciate the way you've listened today. You've listened well, and I appreciate it. Come back and be with us next week, and we'll talk about communication. Good to have you today.